The government will today consider plans to charge international protection applicants for their accommodation if those applicants are working. If they do not pay, barriers could be applied when they're seeking citizenship, or they could face being pursued by debt collectors. The amount to be paid would range from €15 to €238, depending on the individual's earnings. The proposal comes after another suggestion from government to cut the time Ukrainian refugees can remain in state accommodation from 90 days to 30 days. Conor Sheehan is Labour's spokesperson on housing, local government and heritage and joins me now. Conor, good morning.
Good morning, Pat, and a very good morning to your listeners.
What is your reaction to this discussion by government?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm slightly concerned about the framing of this. This seems like quite a knee-jerk reaction, and it seems to me like government are making up policy on the hoof through the media without proper planning and due diligence. I have no issue in principle with people making a financial contribution towards their accommodation if they come here and if they are working. I think that's fair and reasonable. But what we actually need to see is consistent standards across accommodation centres, which we don't have at the moment because we don't have a proper legislative framework for IPAS accommodation. I mean, there are some people who are living in fantastic accommodation centres, but there are other people who are living with maybe 6 or 7 people in a room. They may have mouldy walls and ceilings. And I'm getting this off reports that I've read from Doris and from HICWA in relation to this. And I mean, that's my concern in relation to this.
So the principle you have no problem with, that people who are working and who are currently living in state accommodation free of charge, that they should make a contribution. You've no quibble with the principle.
I have no quibble at all with the principle. I think, in fact, people should make a financial contribution. But I think if they are making a financial contribution, then it should be someplace that's decent and humane.
I suppose forgets about the scramble that the state has had to provide accommodation. They've grabbed bits here and bits there, hotels that have been closed down for a long time, buildings that are semi-derelict that had to be refurbed and so on. They've been scrambling to provide all of this accommodation. So the idea that all of it should be of the standard, say, of the City West Hotel is a pipe dream.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that because we've been dealing with this crisis for nearly 4 years now in relation to people arriving from Ukraine, for example. And this is a problem the world over. And the fact of the matter is we need to have a framework, first of all, a legislative framework in relation to IPAS accommodation to ensure that the accommodation is brought up to a decent standard, that the staff are properly vetted and trained, and that these centres are managed properly, which some of them are, and unfortunately some of them are not. And I would have a huge issue with somebody, for example, paying, €200 or €300 or €200 a week, for example, to sleep in a room with 6 other people, especially given the issues that are there in the private.
Now, as I say, it's a discussion so far. I would venture to suggest that if accommodation is really grossly substandard and 6 people sharing a room, that the idea of paying €200 a head to spend your time with 6 other people or 5 other people in a room, that simply is not going to happen. That couldn't happen because it would be ridiculously unfair.
Well, I think in order to stop that happening, we need to make sure that IPAS accommodation is properly vetted and inspected, and that it is of a minimum standard. I mean, we've some fantastic accommodation providers, and if you look at the reports, the residents that are in those accommodation are very happy with it, but equally we do have some substandard accommodation, and it's all there in reports that HICWA and others do. I'm very, very concerned though with this proposal to cut the time that people who arrive from Ukraine are entitled to stay in accommodation for from 90 to 30 days, because we have an issue. And if you drill into the homeless figures, it backs this up, with people leaving essentially state accommodation and going straight into homelessness because the private rental market is essentially broken. And I'm really concerned that this is going to increase homelessness, that there is no coordination here or forward planning from government. We still haven't seen the minister's new housing plan. We still haven't seen a homelessness prevention framework. And I'm really concerned that this proposal amounts to, say, the left side of the government, which is the justice side, not talking to the Department of Housing properly.
Now, one of the
relation
issues,
to this.
obviously, if you have people coming from Ukraine to here who are caring for children or elderly relatives or whatever, they may not be in a position to go out to work. So the idea that if someone comes in and they are entitled to work, as Ukrainians are, that they spend only 30 days there because they don't want them to get, if you like, a feeling that this is my permanent home, when that IPAS accommodation might be needed for a newcomer coming in a month's time. You get all the arguments about the children are in school, we don't want to disrupt them, and therefore the state cannot make that accommodation available because it's supposed to be by definition temporary. It's not supposed to be a permanent home for people. So the principle of the thing that you spend 30 days, you're entitled to work, go find a job, find accommodation with family, relatives, friends, whatever, and then there's room for more people coming in. In theory, that might work. In practice, with people with dependents and so on, they may not be able to get that job.
I can't see this working at all. And I mean, the war in Ukraine, first of all, is still a live issue. So many of these people who come here may have other issues arising from having lived in a war zone. And the other issue as well is you have a language barrier, and you have issues there around 30 days.
So 30 days is not
totally
enough time
unfeasible.
to learn a language and be competent so you can function in the workplace.
I don't think 30 days is enough time to get somebody out of temporary accommodation and into permanent accommodation, given the issues we have in the private rental market at the moment, given how expensive rents are and given how hard it is to secure a rental in the private rental market. I mean, we had an issue at the start of 2024 where we had people rough sleeping along the canals in Dublin. And I'm afraid that under some of these knee-jerk proposals, without proper due diligence and forward planning, that we could unfortunately end up going down that road again.
Now, people listening to this who themselves have been born and bred in this country and are saying, I can't get rented accommodation, I'm couch surfing at the moment, what about me? What do you say to those people?
Well, the first thing I would say, Pat, is that I deal with the housing crisis day in, day out as a TD, and the housing crisis is on the government. The fact of the matter is, when in 2021 we had 11,000 people homeless, we now have 16,000 people homeless. Government are making the housing crisis worse. It is not the fault of people who are arriving here because they have to flee, war or persecution, that we have a housing crisis. And we need to maintain that sense of social solidarity, because we've had a terrifying rise in racism. I mean, you only have to look at what happened in Drogheda over the weekend. So what I would say to anybody is that your anger is real. I totally get it. But if your anger is directed at vulnerable migrants, then I'm sorry, but your anger is misdirected. You should direct it at the government.
Now, do we need to take a different approach to the whole question of asylum seekers? I mean, when you say it doesn't have an impact, of course it has an impact. If you've got 100,000 people who come in seeking asylum, seeking refuge from the war in Ukraine, of course there will be a bigger demand on services. Of course, resources that might be deployed on the indigenous population will be deployed elsewhere. So it is disingenuous to suggest there can be no impact by the arrival of such huge numbers in a relatively short time. There has to be.
Well, I think it's disingenuous as well, Pat, to suggest that all our problems are caused by...
No, I didn't say that. I was saying that when you have a whole pile of people coming in who we didn't expect and who were not really budgeted for, et cetera, in terms of services and housing and all the rest of it, of course it has a knock-on effect. It's got to. It makes common sense.
Of course, it has a knock-on effect. But the other thing I would say is that the year where we had the highest level of inward net migration was not 22, 23, 24. It was actually 2007. And which shows that, our public services in this country are creaking. We obviously know we have a housing crisis, but where there is war, where there is famine, where there is persecution, people are going to move. It's a tale as old as time. Other countries are struggling to deal with migration as well. It's not acceptable to simply just say, oh, we can turn all these people away, because we have obligations as a member of the European Union, and we need to do proper forward planning in relation to this to make sure, for example, that when people arrive, A, we can accommodate them, and
Mm.
B, we put in place additional resources and services to make sure that local
Yeah,
communities don't feel
again, the
discommoded.
wisdom of hindsight is wonderful. Many people back in February of 2023, when Russia invaded Ukraine, or was it 22? How many people said there's going to be a flood of refugees all over Europe? They didn't know. Lavrov, the night before the invasion, said there would be no invasion. So how can you forward plan for events?
Well, I would say is that we know that this war has been ongoing since 2022. We're now nearly 4 years in. So I think government should have done more in terms of, for example, we have loads of vacant public buildings. I can even think here in my own city of Limerick, the former Barrington's Hospital. In Dublin, not far from where your studio is, you have Baggot Street Hospital. These are vacant HSE. Well, Barrington's was privately owned, but Baggot Street Hospital was owned by is owned by the HSE, and these should be, if necessary, repurposed for temporary accommodation purposes.
That's been suggested many, many times, and for some reason it hasn't happened. But it will only amount to 1 week's arrivals in any event. It's not massive like City West. Anyway, Conor, thank you very much for joining us. That's Conor Sheehan TD, spokesperson on housing, local government, and heritage for the Labour Party.